All right, it's straight up 10 a.m. according to my cell phone, which I assume stays with the world time clock. So you want to get started, Michael?
Yes, we will get started right now. It is now 10 o'clock. Welcome everybody to the next FEHA webinar on splash pads, understanding risks and creating best practices. Just want to remind everybody to stay on mute unless we open it up for questions. If you do have any questions during the webinar, there is a chat box and we will answer the questions as we go through, and we'll be monitoring that. For those of you that, if your name's not showing up on the side, please make sure you send me a private chat with your name so that I can get your certificates out to you. And this webinar will be recorded. It's being recorded right now. The recording will be available on the FEHA website within the week, along with a test. If there's any members that could not make the webinar today, they can take the test later on and submit that for contact hours and get a certificate emailed to them as well. So with that, I want to introduce Lauren Broom, and she will be our instructor today.
Welcome, everybody. I'm so happy to have a bunch of people on here and get to talk about splash pads today. They're kind of their own little unique thing in the aquatic industry compared to swimming pools. I know a lot of you work for the health department, so you probably inspect these facilities among other facilities out there. So I did this presentation also for the Florida Parks and Rec Association this past year on splash pads. They're deciding to put splash pads in more now because of economics. They do not have to have lifeguards or attendants there. So they look at it as there's not a drowning hazard and they don't have to pay for people to be there. So we may see more splash pads as we move forward. So let's dive right in. So I'm Lauren Broom. A little bit about me. I'm a PHTA CPO instructor, been teaching for almost 10 years. The CPO class, I'm teaching virtually now as well as in person in Florida. I am a registered sanitarian. I am a FEHA member, have been a FEHA member for 16 years. And I used to work for the Florida Department of Health. I recently left in August of 2020 to pursue other things. So that's a little bit about me. I'm also recently became an authorized OSHA trainer. So I will be teaching OSHA 10 and OSHA 30 down the road. So the popularity of splash pads have gained traction over the past decade. So these facilities do have their own inherent risks, since that water is recirculated. So the objective of this presentation that I'm doing for you today is to help identify specifically public health risks. I'm not talking about safety. Safety, that would be a whole other presentation if we talked about the safety risks of splash pads, like the surfaces and stuff like that. So, and we want to create best practices and understand what kind of equipment, what best practices we can do for these specific public health risks in these facilities. So we want to recognize our public health risks in splash pads specifically. We want to identify our best practices to control them. We want to list examples of some recreational water illness outbreaks specific to splash pads. And then we're going to look at a little bit at the design and treatment equipment that's used to minimize recreational water illness outbreak hazards. So we're talking about public health hazards here, not safety. So splash pads have many names: spray parks, wet decks, splash parks, spray grounds. I know that we used to kind of like to call them baby bidets, just because they put their little hiney over that spray feature and it sprays right up. So lots of names people call it in the back of their mind as well. The CDC Model Aquatic Health Code categorizes these as an increased risk aquatic venue. So water does not accumulate, which does reduce the risk of drowning. There's an increased popularity because there's little to no supervision compared to a wading pool, spa, or a traditional pool. And it's cheaper to run for parks and rec since they don't have the supervision that's required. So when you're looking at the main overall design. You've either got a recirculating system or a non-recirculating system. The higher risk is our recirculating system, of course. Design is often not indicated to the public. They don't know. They're not going to know if it's a lower risk non-recirculating system versus a recirculating system. The presentation here is going to focus on the recirculating splash pads because that's where our public health risk is. So the higher risk of contamination and disease transmission that can be mitigated through proper design and operation, that's what we're going to talk about over here on our recirculating system. So that water's going back and being recirculated over and over and over. And if we're not maintaining things properly, that's where we're increasing our public health risk. So risk factors for splash pads. Of course, behavior of people using it. It's mostly young children and diapered children. And yes, swim diapers are better than regular diapers when they're in that splash pad. Regular diapers will swell up more with water and release more fecal material into the water. So definitely want to make sure, hopefully they're wearing the appropriate diapers. I know health department rule does not have any authority over that, but we're talking about the risk factors here. They're non-hygienic behaviors like exposing their butt to spray features, or they like to drink the water. This was in a newspaper. I cut out the name, but this was our local splash pad in the county I used to work for when I worked for the DOH. And this little kid has his little tongue out, and here's the splash pad water. So children will do that. They're young, they think, oh, I can drink this, but that increases the risk. So just to give you perspective, there's one infective bowel movement that can release enough oocysts of Cryptosporidium to contaminate 100 million gallons of water. So it's a very small amount that you would ingest that can cause illness. So it's an open system outdoors, thus you can get contamination from animals, birds, dust. You have a larger bathing load in relation to the volume of water. So there's an increased chance of fecal contamination and an increased turbidity in the water, which will lower the usefulness of our disinfection. You have reduced turnover rates. And then you have areas that are constantly damp for prolonged periods of time, which will have a higher level of microorganisms compared to those submerged constantly in your chlorinated water. These are more risk factors. Facility may use foggers or misters in the area. That is its own risk separate from what we're talking about right now. That could be a source of a Legionella outbreak if they don't disinfect that fogger or mister system in their waiting area or wherever they have it. Looking at the water supply, that even our sprinkler systems, their irrigation, is it reclaimed water that can overspray into the splash pad, stuff like that. Improper signage. If we give bad messages or lack thereof of messages, we're not telling the public the correct information while they're there. We have a greater dissipation of chlorine due to the water being sprayed in a splash pad compared to a pool or a spa. We have a high chlorine stabilizer cyanuric acid level that can cause issues. Lack of superchlorination on a routine basis. Sometimes the Parks and Rec don't know that they need to do that. Lack of properly trained staff that understand how to operate their equipment, because some of our splash pads have ORP controllers, they're using UV as secondary disinfection, or maybe ozone. So here's our irrigation system again that could overspray in the splash pad. It's popular to use reclaimed water in Florida, but that can contaminate possibly the splash pad water if it oversprays or gets into that system in any way. And studies performed found that reclaimed water is often contaminated with crypto-oocysts. People like to bring food and drinks into that fenced-in area, and that could potentially contaminate the water. They sit there, there's benches, and the parents sit there in the fenced-in area and they watch their kids. And they bring food in there and they're eating while they're kind of watching their kids. So that could potentially get into the system. ORP monitoring system could be inoperable or in a lockout mode, which will lock out your chlorine feeder and your pH adjustment feeder. high pH levels that could lower the activity of your chlorine concentration. So you usually need an ORP controller and pH adjustment feeder for most setups. High level of chloramines that cannot be removed by breakpoint chlorination. That'll cause that pool odor, that chlorine odor. It'll cause eyes, nose, and throat irritation in that splash pad area. So here are some pictures of some little kiddos, and this is why there's such a risk. We have a smaller population that are usually not potty trained, or at least not very well potty trained yet, and they like to drink the water. So between drinking the water and their hygienic practices, it really makes it hard to not have an outbreak here unless we're running our facility properly. Gross human fact number 1, the average person involuntarily urinates about 5 to 10 milliliters in the water. And the gross human fact number 2, the average person will involuntarily release about 10 to 25 milligrams of fecal matter in the pool water. No matter how well you think you wiped yourself really well, that if a child did it, they probably didn't do as good of a job as an adult. They go back into the facility. If we're not maintaining the disinfectant levels and everything else correctly, there's still going to be some fecal matter added to the water no matter what. This is just to make you laugh a little bit. We could put a fake poop there in the splash pad. That would scare everybody. But seriously, if you did really find a fecal accident in your splash pad, sitting there in the splash pad, please close the splash pad immediately. The facility needs to know that they need to do that immediately until they abate per the CDC fecal guidelines. So the public health risks, what are they? Recreational water illness outbreak. That's what we're talking about. Cryptosporidium is the most common. It's a protozoan parasite, most common outbreak in splash pads. Giardia is also a protozoan parasite, but crypto is so much more common because of the oocyst in the life cycle of that protozoan parasite. It's very hard to kill that part of the life cycle. So if you don't kill that part of the cycle, it's just going to continue in the water. It takes 20 parts per million for 12.75 hours to kill Cryptosporidium. It takes a 1 ppm at 45 minutes to kill Giardia. So even though they're both protozoan parasites, the amount of chlorine and the amount of time are vastly different between the two. Salmonella, there's been a couple of Salmonella outbreaks, not as common. As we go down, these become least likely. So crypto is at the top of my list because it is usually the culprit. And as you go down, it's probably least likely. Like we're going to talk about Legionella. And Legionella, they haven't had a documented outbreak of Legionella in a splash pad. It's been in spas, but not splash pads. They haven't had a documented outbreak. And I researched because I thought aerosolized water droplets, mainly because the water in the splash pad is not heated like a spa is. So let's talk, who's at risk? Who's at most risk? Young children, pregnant women, people with weakened immune systems that may have like AIDS, cancer, or other inherited diseases, or diabetes, or anything else that's going to bring down their immune system. They become an immunocompromised population. So quick review, how are recreational water illnesses for those of you that might be new to this industry? RWIs, I'm going to call them RWIs moving forward. They can be transmitted in 3 main ways: ingesting the water, contact with the contaminated water, and through the air with aerosolized water droplets that are contaminated with one of these organisms. So where do they come from? Where do these organisms come from? From swimmers. Average person will swallow about 1 ounce of water for every 30 minutes of swimming. And GI illness is going to be caused by swallowing food or water that is contaminated with poop. And the average person carries about 0.14 grams of feces or poo in their rear end. Babies carry more just because they're not potty trained. Do you think anyone in this picture has diarrhea? Is there a swimming pool in this picture? but we have a lot of people here. Most likely, we're probably dealing with somebody that has diarrhea or has had diarrhea in the last 2 weeks that probably shouldn't be in this facility. So it's going to come down to how we run it. There's a lot of good information on the CDC website. This is right off of their healthyswimming.org website. This is specific to splash pads, so you can always download these flyers, and they're really good. It's swallowing the water is the biggie. That increases risk, but making sure that you're not having kids naked in the water. And I'm going to talk about some outbreaks and some of the risks that were determined from some of the outbreaks. So where do these organisms come from? Again, from swimmers. Some of it is a repeat here. You add up all the bodies using the splash pad and you get a fair amount of probably poo in the water, especially since we have a lot of children in there. If a person has an accident, formed, or diarrhea, then the amount of feces in the water goes way up. And at some point, concentration rises above the minimum for infection and you get an outbreak. So the germs that cause GI illness, recreational water illnesses, have very low infective doses. So E. coli, the dose that will cause disease is 10 cells, and we're talking E. coli 0157H7. Norovirus only takes 10 particles. Giardia is anywhere from 10 to 100 cysts, and Cryptosporidium only takes 10 cysts. I've been told that if you have a little bit of water on your lips that has crypto in it, and you lick the water off your lips, you have enough infective dose of crypto to be able to possibly get sick. Let's look at the GI illness causing pathogens. And so we have bacteria and parasites. So the bacteria that we're mainly going to talk about today will be the E. coli 0157H7. We'll talk about Shigella. We'll talk about Salmonella. These are killed by chlorine very quickly. All the bacteria killed in about 1 minute or less out of 1 part per million of free available chlorine. Giardia, 30 minutes at a 2 ppm. Like I said earlier, a 1 ppm at 45 minutes as well. That's in the CDC guidelines for Giardia. And Cryptosporidium, 20 ppm, 12.75 hours, in the absence of cyanuric acid though. There are newer guidelines that you need to look at based on cyanuric acid in the water when you have a diarrheal incident. They did update that a few years ago. I'm not going to cover that. This isn't a training on CDC guidelines in detail. But this is Cryptosporidium. Could this be lurking in your water? This is Cryptosporidium under a very intense microscope. This is the villi in the wall lining of your intestine. This is the invader coming out of the cyst, and the tentacles grabbing into that wall of your small intestine. Your body literally goes, holy, oh my gosh, I gotta go. So your body's trying to get rid of it, but it latching in is gonna cause that diarrhea. Crypto is the 800-pound gorilla of recreational water illnesses. It amounts for 75% of our recreational water illness outbreaks. So it's well represented in our outbreaks nationwide. Outbreaks can become community-wide and can be spread through other ways like child care centers and food establishments. So you can't always say it's just going to be a recreational water illness. We that work in public health or did work in public health know that there can be other avenues for these organisms. It starts as one and can go into other avenues afterwards. Crypto is very chlorine resistant. It requires additional treatment sometimes to kill it, secondary treatment. That's why you see that on splash pads quite a bit. So you'll see maybe a secondary UV or ozone system along with a chlorinating system. It's the most common and treated recreational venues that you'll find is crypto. The infective unit is the oocyst. It's built like a basketball with 2 larvae inside the ball. It's much larger than bacteria, so it's very difficult to kill with routine disinfectant levels. It takes a lot of chlorine to actually penetrate that cyst. And you have to have effective filtration to help remove it as well, like a DE filter or something like that. Best prevention is to discourage swimmers who have been ill. So do not swim until 2 weeks after your symptoms have ended. So they feel fine, they want to go swimming, but they could still spread the cysts from their poo if it gets into the water at this point. This is that life cycle of the Cryptosporidium. So it's that cyst that we're worried about. That cyst is the hard part of the life cycle that is hard to kill. So crypto, what does it cause? Symptoms: diarrhea, loose or watery stools, stomach cramps, upset stomach, or slight fever. And we know that not everybody's going to have every symptom on whatever slide I show. Some people only have one symptom. It depends on your immune system. We all know that. How is crypto spread? By fecal contamination of the water from a person infected with it. Factors that contribute it to be spread is through inadequate animal waste removal, inadequate filtration, inadequate or interrupted disinfection, and contamination from another water source that oversprayed into it. So again, if you have active diarrhea in the last 14 days, don't go into the water for that full 2 weeks after your symptoms have ended. So hyperchlorination in crypto, it's different from routine super shocking or breakpoint chlorination. It's specific for inactivating crypto. So you have to achieve the contact time of 15,300 minutes. And that's what the CDC guidelines are following. So the correct use of hyperchlorination for crypto is shown here. You want to keep your free available chlorine at 20 ppm for the entire 12.75 hours. If it drops below 20, during that 12.75 hours, you may risk not actually killing the oocyst properly. So I usually tell my pool operators to give a buffer. 2 things can happen. I didn't know this was going to change on me. I don't know if my thing's on a timer. So you can either raise your chlorine level up to a 25 and have that 5 ppm buffer for your outdoor pool, and then you know that you've been at least at the 20 for that 12.75 hours. There is a way to calculate your contact time, and you can reduce the amount of hours and heighten the amount of chlorine in order to reduce that time period. But that's for another class. Now I'm trying to get this to switch. There we go. So this is just some statistics from the CDC. The big point I want you to get out of this is from the year 2000 to the year 2014. The dark blue is Cryptosporidium. So you see more dark blue on these bars than anything else. It's just to show that the majority of our outbreaks are due to Cryptosporidium. For those of us that like pictures and statistics this way, instead of me just putting it up on a slide. Here's another way that's hard to see this slide with the white writing, but the big red piece is Cryptosporidium. It accounts for 75% of the outbreaks because of how chlorine tolerant it is. All these small pieces are Shigella, E. coli, Giardia, other, norovirus, unknown. Very small pieces because our minimum chlorine levels that we require, at least in Florida for public pools, are going to be effective at keeping those at bay. We really shouldn't ever see, there is no question, we shouldn't see any outbreaks of these other organisms really if the pool was maintained at the minimum disinfectant levels at all times. But we know that it's not. So that's why we still have some outbreaks of those. The crypto, Florida doesn't allow above 10. 10's not going to kill crypto. So initially you may have a start of an outbreak. It's how the pool operator handles it once they've been notified by the department that there was a person that had used the facility. If that's documented and there's more crypto cases after, that's where that pool operator is now going to be possibly negligent by not doing their job properly and closing the facility and following CDC fecal guidelines, which is what the department would give them. These are recreational water illness outbreaks of crypto, and the blue bar is treated water. Each of these bars, the blue is treated water, the yellow is untreated water like lakes, rivers, and oceans. So really, Cryptosporidium outbreaks are happening in treated water. So we're worried about the poo, okay? Finding the poo in the water, getting into the water, and then not having enough disinfectant and treatment. Animals do add to our aquatic venues. You can't, if it's outdoor, it's so hard to continue to keep them out. It does happen. So this is raccoon over here. And if you go to the CDC website, healthyswimming.org, look up on there, you'll find about animals, and they'll get into birds, they'll get into raccoons, they'll get into other animals. Raccoons are very specific. They spread a roundworm that can be spread from them being in the water or their poo to humans. So there's very specific procedures for raccoons compared to birds and other animals. This picture was a pool. A homeowner couldn't figure out what was pooping and peeing in their pool. They put up a Ring security camera, and it was a bobcat coming in and then putting his little hiney up to the edge of the pool, and he's pooping and peeing in the pool. All right. So very hard. It could be different animals, but they can spread crypto as well to us. So here's an example of a crypto outbreak. It was in Broward County, Florida, at a water park. There were 22 cases, 16 confirmed, July to August of 96. It was suspected that it was a 2-year-old with diarrhea as the initial case. Problems seen when they did their inspection: grossly exceeded their bathing load of 118 people. Water clarity was compromised. The water was very cloudy. And the ozonator for their secondary disinfection was not running. It was not operational. So these were the things found when they went out there to do their inspection after they had figured out there was an outbreak going on. Here's a crypto slash, it was a co-infection, or people had both, crypto slash Shigella outbreak in Volusia County in a splash pad. Volume of water was 3,380 gallons recirculated. August of 1999, number affected was 38 people in that outbreak. So an environmental assessment was done, and contributing factors to the outbreak was there was no filtration system installed, inadequate chlorine residual. The fountain water, what they saw, was being ingested by people there. There was consumption of food and water at the splash pad, and there were a lot of young children in swim diapers that were standing in the spray nozzles. And chlorine levels were not being monitored. They weren't being recorded or anything like that. So the results after the closure of the splash pad, the cartridge filtration system was now installed. So now they had a filtration system. They added an ORP controller to monitor chlorine residual. And it was installed to halt fountain operation automatically when the chlorine residual fell below 3 ppm. So basically it would shut the whole fountain off. And if the fountain's off, nobody's going to go use it. They stand there, it doesn't turn on. So they had that ORP automatically halt the operation of that fountain if the residual dropped below 3 ppm. They put signage up advising to shower before going into the fountain, do not drink the water since it's recirculated, and change swim diapers in appropriate areas. And they should have signage to show where these bathrooms and diaper changing is located. Here's a Diarrhea outbreak in Florida in a splash pad in 2006. It affected 49 people. And the contributing factors to the outbreak were inadequate chlorination and other operational deficiencies. And here's a crypto outbreak I personally worked in 2007 in the county I was in. And it was 2 fountain features. One child initially that had gone into 2 splash pads in our county while ill with diarrhea. We had 33 confirmed cases, and it was also identified it was now being spread through a local child care center as well. So what did we do? Well, this is what we found when we went out. So we did an inspection for the outbreak, about 6,000 gallons of water in the initial splash pad. There's no lifeguards or attendants. There's nobody there watching what's going on. We saw children drinking the water, young children naked in the water, parents changing diapers next to the splash pad, people walking through the fountain and nearby bird droppings, and joggers were rinsing their clothes and shoes after they went running in the area. When we interviewed people, they did not know that the water was recirculated. They just thought it went to sewer. And the sprinkler system nearby, we visually saw the overspray able to get into the splash pad water, and it was reclaimed water. So what did we do? Recommendations. We had them post warning signs, and this was before the required signage that they added certain rules to the DOH rule. So this was recommendations that we gave them from the outbreak, but we couldn't make them do it at the time. So post warning signs not to drink fountain water. Improve swimmer hygiene by putting signage. Do not swim while ill with diarrhea. Put directional signs or something to indicate where diaper changing areas are and where restrooms are. That children maybe should wear swim diapers. We spoke with the pool operator about superchlorinating or hyperchlorinating regularly. And the hardest one was for them to switch their irrigation system to potable water. So here's a cluster of Giardia and crypto cases in Orange County in 2006. They interviewed, and it was a 22-month-old male that had Giardia and crypto, and then also 3 cases of Giardia with 4-year-old, 2-year-old, and a 23-month-old. So it was one splash pad that we're calling Splash Park A. So September of 2006, there was an environmental investigation done of Splash Park A. And the major violation was the concentration of chlorine was less than 0.5 ppm. There was non-functioning pH and ORP sensor unit. The paper cartridge filter, that's what they had for filtration. And that's only effective to 50, that level right there for filtration, which is not going to be effective at getting crypto or Giardia out all the time. DE is really the only one that we're going to talk about later that's really effective at the micron size to get crypto out and Giardia out. The splash pad wasn't draining properly, so there was probably standing water where now maybe the chlorine residual drops and then maybe crypto is there or Giardia is located there. There was no chemical log. The bathrooms were not clean, and the algae was able to build up on the deck. So immediately it was closed, and the homeowners association did let go of their pool company that was in charge of the maintenance. So it's not always Parks and Rec. You could have other facilities that have splash pads as well. And they cleared it to reopen in October once they were able to make their corrections. So some national crypto outbreaks. This is in Illinois in 2001. It affected 358 people. So depending on population size and people using the splash pad, it could be a lot bigger number than what we've just talked about. The contributing factor to this outbreak was inadequate chlorination. And here's another one in Seneca, New York. This is a well-known one. And this is kind of where secondary disinfection came out of. I know Doug Sackett up in New York. He helped with Bob Vincent and a lot of other good people in the industry, helped write the Model Aquatic Health Code in sections. And this was a big outbreak in the state of New York in a splash pad in 2005. It affected 4,000 people. And the contributing factors was inadequate chlorination, and crypto was found in the holding tanks. So it did result in a class action lawsuit against the state for monetary compensation. All right, so that's crypto. Giardia, here's Giardia, another protozoan parasite, and I'm not going to read all the symptoms. You guys can see they're all the GI symptoms and a few more added in. Of course, again, not everybody's going to have every one of these symptoms. It's spread by fecal contamination, poop in the water, and factors that contributed to spread is inadequate or interrupted disinfection, improper filtration, and contamination from another water source like an irrigation system, sprinkler system. So here's a Giardia crypto outbreak in a splash pad in Orange County. In 2006, they had 55 total cases from the splash pad outbreak. 38 were Giardia, 9 were crypto, 2 were co-infections, 6 were probably suspect and never actually confirmed. There were 8 known secondary infections through food, school, or daycare. And problems seen from the inspection when they went out, chronic maintenance that wasn't occurring. They just were not doing the maintenance required. Filtration problems and water chemistry problems. So remember, the challenge is crypto is very chlorine resistant compared to Giardia. Here's Shigella. Not as many of these outbreaks as crypto and Giardia, of course. So Shigella is a bacteria, causes abdominal pain, diarrhea. That diarrhea could contain blood, pus, or mucus. It's spread by fecal contamination in the water from an infected user or contaminated water that infiltrated the splash pad like an irrigation system. So here's an outbreak. Here's an example of a Shigellosis outbreak in Florida, in Volusia County, in a splash pad. 4 lab confirmed cases of Shigella in 99. Only common activities, they use a splash pad. So the fountain was installed though prior to the code update that required health department approval. So it wasn't having to meet all those requirements yet. Legionella. This is kind of a unique one now. It's spread through aerosolized water. It's a bacteria. It can cause Pontiac disease, which is the lesser severe form of illness it causes. Legionnaire's disease is the one that's the really bad one with pneumonia. And you can have up to 30% of positive Legionella cases that have Legionnaire's disease can actually die, especially if they're elderly or immunocompromised. But it's going to cause all these symptoms here. And it's easy to test for Legionella now. If somebody comes in active with pneumonia, they can do a urine antigen test now. And if it tests positive and they're symptomatic with active pneumonia, they're going to probably diagnose them with Legionella. So Legionella likes to grow in biofilms. It thrives at 90 degrees to 106. Thus why it's not very common and why there's no documented outbreaks of Legionella in a splash pad, because splash pads usually don't heat their water, but spas do. And this is like the perfect temperature, the perfect storm for a spa. So almost all infections come from hot tubs. So they suspect that someday we may get a Legionella outbreak from a splash pad. The possibility is there, but they haven't documented any. It's not as resistant to chlorine as crypto, so it's easily killed by our disinfection and stuff like that. So be aware. More likely, if you have a shower, a poolside shower at the splash pad, and they don't take care of that and chlorinate that properly or heat the water to be able to disinfect for Legionella, that's where you get aerosolized water. You might get Legionella there, but it's really going to be spas because of that temperature. It thrives and loves that temperature. So there's not any documented cases of a Legionella outbreak in a splash pad. Really only been in hot tubs and spas. Again, spread by aerosolized water droplets from maybe the splash pad spray features. It's possible. There's, again, no documented cases. But if you have a lack of superchlorination, that's where you risk maybe having it, because superchlorinating will kill it. There have been documented cases linked to decorative fountains, which also recirculate water and spray water, but there haven't been any in splash pads. All right, Salmonella. Most people with Salmonella infection will have diarrhea, fever, stomach cramps, and some people may have nausea, vomiting, or a headache. But it's easily killed by our regular disinfection levels, and waterborne outbreaks of this organism are uncommon because it's easily killed. But here's a national outbreak in Tennessee in a splash pad in June of 2014. Splash pads are not regulated in the state of Tennessee at that time. There were 10 people ill from the use of that splash pad. The risk factors that may have possibly contributed to the outbreak was there was no free chlorine level in the splash pad water. Children were seen drinking the splash pad water. They were putting their buttocks over the spray heads, and a daily chemical log for pH and chlorine levels were not being maintained. It wasn't regulated, so that's probably why a lot of these things were out of whack. Prevention ideas that were given to them, recommendations, because they're not regulated, is to regulate the splash pads and to improve education of patrons. If they're not going to get regulated, try to put up signage and different ways to educate the people using it. So let's look at best practices. Best practices, first one we're going to look at is design. You want proper siting of your splash pad. It's going to minimize potential sources of dust, debris, and animals. You want exclusion of animals, and you can do this through signage and fencing, and make sure that people aren't bringing animals in. When I went out and had inspected a local splash pad once, somebody had it was cute, it was a little Cavalier King Charles Spaniel, but they were in the fenced in area, and it wasn't a service animal. So they could potentially contaminate that water. Have adequately sized water reservoir, meaning your holding tank, to allow dilution and more effective disinfection. It's going to help minimize accumulation of disinfectant byproducts like chloramines, and it's going to assist with properly balanced water chemistry. You want to have meet provisions for constant recirculation, because if the water's not moving, you're not disinfecting it and you're not filtrating it either. You want to have discharge of water when not in use. So spray features are going to be on separate pumps than filtration and the disinfection system. Feature pumps cannot operate when the treatment pump is not operating. That would be good. Discharge some of the water from the reservoir while the park is closed to obtain more fresh water. You want to provide adequate filtration to control turbidity so that the disinfection system can operate as intended. So you want a turbidity of less than 3 nephelometric turbidity units. You want the ability to drain the deck directly to waste. Chlorination should be at least 2 ppm. You recommend, now newer splash pads in Florida are required to have a secondary disinfection. If they were built before a specific year, they're grandfathered in without having to have that second form of disinfection. So secondary disinfection, we'll talk about in a little bit, could be UV or ozone. Foggers or misters, have it from a potable water supply, and properly disinfect against any Legionella growth that might be there if they have that fogger or mister system in the splash pad area. And outfit your feature with an automatic shutoff device or audible alarm. So we talked about earlier, if that chlorine drops below 2 ppm, we shut the fountain off when we don't have proper disinfectant. Look at your showers, your spray pad showers. Make sure they're working. Sometimes I'd show up and check these showers and they weren't operable. If there's a hose bib here, make sure that there's a vacuum breaker on it. Prevents backflow. They may use this hose bib right here to spray off and clean their splash pad deck. It's in the fenced in area, so it's most likely what they're going to use it for. Best practices on operation. Flush the pad surface prior to opening it for operation. Do it daily, and you should send it directly to waste. Inspections, look for glass and poo in the splash pad. Make sure there's regular sanitation. Check the deck and the feature area. Make sure that you're cleaning garbage cans out and stuff like that so that we don't have overflowing garbage cans and stuff flying into the splash pad. Do routine water testing with an approved test kit. Keep a daily chemical log on site for chlorine and pH test readings. Here's a good one. They're keeping chlorine, pH, and they're writing some other stuff like temperature, I think, ORP level, different things like that when they clean their filter. So that's a good detailed chemical log. Here's one. They've got 2 different splash pads and they have a decorative fountain that they're still keeping a log on even though we don't regulate it. There's their test kit. There's some more logging. They're doing a good job here. This is nice and neat and tidy. They even got their hand sanitizer over here, guys. They have a thermometer to check temperature. So they're keeping really good detailed records. Make sure that they're doing that. Best practices on operation. ORP meters for chlorine activity, which is our millivolt reading, and pH readings. The fountain should automatically cease if the chlorine level is less than 2, it should be 2 ppm because that's our minimum in Florida. But if you want to make it 3, then at least it cuts off before it would even get close to the 2. That's why we had the 3 there. Review equipment requirements to maximize filtration and removal of your particulate matter, because getting that stuff out that can bind with your disinfectant is important. Filtration is an important part. And you want to review your operational procedures to optimize your filtration performance. So let's get into filtration a little bit. So there's many different types of filters to choose from in the aquatic industry. You want to choose the best micron size and filter with easiest maintenance. That's how people look at it. Most splash pads are going to use a cartridge filter or a sand filter. That's usually what we see. So you need to clean it as needed to maintain proper flow rate. Need good filtration rate to reduce that turbidity. They're using cartridge and sand. Just understand the micron size that you're going to filter down is 50 or 20 microns, depending on it's a rapid rate or high rate sand filter. A cartridge filter is down to 15 microns. DE is down to 4 microns. DE is really the filter that would possibly be able to filter out some of the crypto. Cartridge and sand really won't be able to. The reason why they use those is because it's easier to take care of. And you should change your cartridge filters monthly. So let's look at the parasite sizes, and then we'll go back to the previous slide. So Giardia is a micron size of 8 to 14. Crypto has the oocyst has a micron size of 4 to 6. So you can see our average removal size here for our different filters. 25 microns for sand, cartridge is at 15, and DE is at 4. So really, DE here is the only one that would really be effective at possibly filtering out some of these oocysts. Maybe be able to do it. So always make sure that they're doing maintenance. Make sure that they're scheduling maintenance properly, because if you don't schedule time for maintenance, your equipment will schedule it for you. It will, no matter what. So let's look at disinfection. So usually on a splash pad, you're going to have some type of primary disinfection with chlorine. Either you're going to have 2 liquid feeders here. One's chlorine, one is acid. They're feeding from their tanks. They're all nice and labeled and everything like code. Or you might have a cow hypo feeder, like we have over here. It's a spray erosion feeder. And again, you'd have an acid feeder as well. And then our newer splash pads, secondary disinfection, either UV or ozone. This is going to back up your chlorine. Your chlorine is in the water all the time. Even all the way through the splash pad, you're going to have a residual that you can test. UV and ozone are secondary because they don't leave a residual in the water. You can't test it. So it disinfects at the unit, at that point of where it's produced. And after that, it's done. But it's a useful secondary disinfection system with your primary. So primary disinfection, the use of a disinfectant like chlorine is going to be able to kill 99.9% of our microorganisms. It can oxidize and sanitize. It can leave a residual in the water that can be read on a pool test kit. And it should be fed by an automatic feeder. You can't be hand feeding. So fed by an automatic feeder, and it works best with an ORP controller. So that when the person's not there, we're still trying to control the chemical levels when people are getting in and out of the splash pad. Secondary disinfection, you have choices. The 2 biggies are ozone and UV light. Secondary disinfection is required this is out of the Model Aquatic Health Code. Secondary disinfection is required in the Model Aquatic Health Code for increased risk aquatic venues. And it has to be with an NSF ANSI standard 50 approval. So the Model Aquatic Health Code has identified splash pads as increased risk aquatic venues. So they say you have to have secondary disinfection. So these systems are required to provide a minimum of a 3 log, which would be 99.9% inactivation of crypto in the full flow prior to return of the water to the aquatic feature at a minimum flow rate. You can do it UV light or ozone. Again, these are secondary disinfection systems because, again, they don't leave a residual in the water that can be read by any test kit. So here's a UV system. Here's your UV lamp system right here. You even see the NSF insignia on it, so that's good. And then we've got our control box, and here's what it looks like, and the operator is able to look at what it's doing, UV intensity, temperatures on there, but they're looking at the UV intensity, and they know what it's supposed to be at when they're running their venue. So UV light will inactivate the microorganisms and breaks down chloramines, which is a disinfection byproduct we don't want to build up in our water. And it does it with light energy. This happens while the water is in the UV chamber. So that's the UV chamber right here. And as long as the water has no turbidity, meaning it's not cloudy. So cloudy water can cause issues with UV working. So there's no further process that occurs once the flow leaves the chamber. UV provides no oxidation except as trace amounts. UV water treatment for a typical UV dose is 30 millijoules per cubic centimeter, and that can provide sufficient disinfection since most pathogens are killed at relatively low UV energy for disinfection. So just giving you that dose for the different recreational water illnesses. So crypto, of course, has the highest required UV dose. So that UV dose for that 3 log 99.9% inactivation that the CDC Model Aquatic Health Code wants, you have to have 12 millijoules per cubic centimeter. So it's the highest one, but it can do that. So why do we use UV? It's easy to use and it reduces your chemical consumption. It's nice to have something that assists your main disinfectant. To say that we want chlorine to do everything is very hard. It's good at disinfecting. Having something to help it oxidize is good. So UV, ozone, excellent as a secondary disinfection. So UVC is the wavelength category that's used for these UV systems. It's a very specific nanometer wavelength of light, 280 to 100 nanometers. This is known as germicidal light. So what are the disadvantages of using UV? First, service technicians will lack background and training on maintaining that system. Turbidity, like we said earlier, will affect how the water is disinfecting since it's cloudy and you have a lack of contact of water with the UV light. The only water that will make it through the UV light will actually get disinfected. So not always 100% of the water, and hence why we make it secondary disinfection. And over time, UV light becomes less effective. You need to factor in replacement of your lamp to maintain your disinfection rates. So that comes down to maintenance. So let's look at benefits of UV systems. You have increased bather comfort, increased employee comfort, reduced need for expensive dilution, reduced corrosion of steel structures, protection against crypto and giardia, increased poolside revenue. It's going to help you use less chlorine, so you're going to save a little bit of money over the long haul. More benefits: destruction of chloramines, effective secondary disinfection, because it's going to help kill 99.9% of your common pathogens causing illness, along with your primary disinfection of chlorine. So you're getting, with both systems, you're getting really good disinfection here. So it's effective against crypto and giardia. You get oxidation of organic contaminants in the water. So it's going to assist your chlorine right here. You use UV, you are now oxidizing these organic contaminants. Your chlorine can now do more of the disinfection instead of having to say, I got to go over here and oxidize these organic contaminants and I got to disinfect these organisms over here. Let's use this to help it so that we can get better outcome out of our chlorine. You get clarification of your pool water with UV and TDS reduction, and no trihalomethane increase or any other change like that. So here's our chloramine reduction. So this is pre-UV and then post-UV. So the blue is showing their chloramine levels. And then once they had UV installed, you can see the chloramine levels which is a disinfection byproduct that's going to build up in the water, it's combined chlorine. We don't want that. It's going to cause issues with people breathing and burn their eyes and stuff like that. So they're using it, and it's helping with this chloramine reduction at the same time, as long as it's secondary disinfection. So again, it's that specific part of the electromagnetic spectrum that we're using. And it's going to denature the DNA. The UV exposure penetrates the cell wall, disrupts the DNA, and prevents cell reproduction. That specific spectrum of light is going to do that to our recreational water illnesses. So the effects of UV irradiation on the DNA, so this is DNA before the exposure and DNA after the exposure. It's breaking some of the links here, the cytosine, guanine, and adenine, thymine bridges. It's breaking that so that you're breaking apart parts of these DNA. So secondary disinfection, the dose required is listed here. So we have some of our doses required to kill. And here's a dose from an example of a very common UV system used in the United States. And it has a much higher level than what's required to kill these. So again, even though you could say that number would be able to kill it on its own, we don't want to rely on UV as our only disinfection system. Chlorine and then secondary UV. And between the two, we're effective. If we maintain properly, we could effectively reduce our likelihood of a recreational water illness. So this is a typical UV system. So you can see there's lamps in here. The water flows between them and it emits that wavelength of light, and it's going to denature the DNA. UV light disinfection, the UV light reactor has been considered for disinfection of interactive water features. Again, the UV dose is 8 to 14 there, millijoules per cubic centimeter to inactivate at least 99.9% of our cryptoosis. The UV dose of 12 to 20 will inactivate at least 99.9% of the Giardia cysts. So that's UV. Let's talk about ozone. Whole different system. Ozone is a gas that is going to be dissolved in water to kill the microorganisms, destroy organics, and break down chloramines by oxidation. This will occur immediately at the ozone gas injection point and continues as the side stream remixes with the main return. So this is how the ozone is made. So you've got the ozone molecules that are going to be split by adding the energy from that ozone corona discharge unit or whatever you're going to use, and resulting in 2 individual oxygen atoms. And the oxygen atoms will unite with other oxygen molecules to produce O3, which is our ozone. And that it disinfects at the point where it's making ozone. Afterwards, you don't have disinfection happening. So ozone does provide the 3-log kill that the Model Aquatic Health Code requires of crypto in the side stream, applied at a single pass at an applied ozone dose of 1.6 ppm over the total pool volume in 24 hours. So the ozone sizing parameter for a splash pad is 1.6 ppm per 4 hours. The dissolved ozone can be measured by an ORP controller, and the ORP can range between 700 and 850 millivolts. But the ORP of 800 millivolts is equivalent to 0.2 ppm of dissolved ozone, which equates to about 40 ppm of chlorine. So again, yes, it sounds like we get plenty with ozone, but we don't want to rely on it as our only disinfection. So that third oxygen atom is held by a weak single bond, and an oxidation reaction occurs upon any collision between the ozone molecule and the molecule of an oxidizable substance in the water, which can be bacteria. So those oxidizable substances are bacteria, viruses, fungi, algae, suntan oils, body oils. So that weak bond splits off, leaving the oxygen as a byproduct. So during an oxidation reaction, organic molecules are changed or destroyed, and dissolved metals are no longer soluble. So this is how ozone works. There's 2 ways to create ozone: ultraviolet ozonator or a corona discharge unit. Corona discharge system produces a much higher concentration and quantity of ozone as compared to an ultraviolet ozone generator. And since an ozone residual is not maintained, this is why it's going to be a supplemental disinfectant to your chlorine or bromine. So your ultraviolet ozone generator has a lower output of ozone and a lesser concentration than the corona discharge generator. Air is passed over a UV lamp, and the energy from the lamp will split the oxygen molecules in the air, and then you get ozone over here. So coming in, you got oxygen, it's going past this UV lamp, it makes ozone over here coming out. So benefits of ozone. Ozone will control your chloramine levels in the water to 0.2 ppm or less. Ozone can eliminate or shocking for chloramine reduction, so it's going to help get rid of chloramines. Ozone offers significantly more oxidation than free chlorine will. Ozone provides that minimum 3 log kill of crypto, along with being able to kill everything else. It'll help destroy emerging pharmaceutical pollutants, such as endocrine disruptors. Ozone provides microflocculation to aid filtration and noticeably improve water clarity. So cleans it up a little bit, eliminates foam from spas even. Ozone reduces the amount of chlorine usage to maintain your free available chlorine residual. And the chlorine use is reduced by 50 to 75% at the lowest applied ozone dose of 1.6 ppm. So this is just the reaction of ozone in the water. So let's compare ozone versus UV here. So ozone kills crypto, so does UV. Ozone kills microorganisms, so does UV. Ozone is a powerful oxidizer. Here's a difference. UV is not an oxidizer. It will not oxidize things out of the water like ozone will. Ozone passes into the pool at low levels to provide additional oxidation. UV affects the water only as it passes through the UV chamber. Ozone functions well in cloudy water and is a microflocculant, which will aid water clarification. UV, only clear water can be effectively dosed with UV. Cloudiness in the water can absorb the UV light. Ozone oxidizes organics and inorganics that will create chloramines, eliminating their production. UV breaks down chloramines that have been previously created. Ozone utilizes ORP to measure the cleanliness of the water. UV systems utilize a UV intensity meter, which measures the UV dose regardless of water quality, but not ORP. Ozone's reaction with free available chlorine is very slow, and in a pool will not affect the free chlorine levels, only chloramine destruction. UV can break down free available chlorine in the water while it breaks down chloramines. And ozone helps destroy biofilm. UV does not. So there's a lot of positives and negatives. Some of them both do the same thing, and then there's positive one versus the other. You have to decide which one is the best one to use and financially feasible for your facility, especially if you're considering building a splash pad. ORP, automatic chemical monitoring. So test kits will measure quantitatively how much there is, part per million. ORP is a qualitative measure of chlorine's work value in millivolts. ORP will tell us what will happen to the disinfectant level 20 minutes from now. ORP can be seen as a predictor of the work that needs to be done in order to maintain our water quality. So ORP is going to measure the oxidizer, the detractors and reducers simultaneously, which will make ORP the best possible control parameter for aquatic venues. That's why we see a lot of them on our splash pads. Research has shown that the amount of reducers like urine, swimmer waste, and organics is changing constantly. So under these conditions, only an ORP can help ensure the inactivation of recreational water illnesses in our facilities. They're working, that ORP is working when the operator's not there and maybe they're somewhere else doing something else. I know our parks and rec with splash pads, there wasn't somebody there constantly monitoring things all the time. They went there in the morning and they went there in the afternoon, and that was it. There was nobody on site. So if there was an alarm or something going on, there was nobody there. So the ORP, if they had an ORP controller that actually like sent alerts to the operator's phone or to their computer, which it's an extra fee, you can do that with that technology now. So benefits of chemical automation with maybe ORP is you get continuous maintenance of your pH and sanitizer levels. You get reduction in partially oxidized organic matter, optimized sanitizer efficiency, and you get reduced chemical consumption. You increase compliance with the health department when you're operating, hopefully, and you have improved service life of your splash pad equipment. So what is pH and ORP controller? It's that automated controller. It's gonna monitor your water chemistry, compares actual water quality readings to desired set points entered into the controller, and implements chemical feeding to automatically maintain pH and sanitizer levels. I call it the brain. If you have an ORP controller, it's a very primitive brain, and you can put things into it. It turns feeders on and off as needed. So it's going to monitor pH and sanitizer effectiveness, makes chemical feed decisions. It's going to actuate chemical feed equipment. It's going to maintain pH and sanitizer levels. And there's many different types of ORP controllers out there. I know you all have seen them. They all work on very much the same technology. Just some of their specific manufacturer guidelines might be a little bit different. This is your control of chemicals. Chlorine over time with the blue line is using an ORP controller. And then that red dotted line is manually adding chemicals. So you can see the dips and valleys. Somebody is off of mute. If you can, everybody check and make sure you're muted so we don't get feedback and stuff. So that I can still hear that person, just so that we don't mess everybody else up. So the red dotted line is if somebody's manually feeding their facility. You get dips and valleys, and when you get to those dips, that's when you risk algae. Michael, are you able to mute everybody? Michael?
Yeah, they are. I don't know who that person is, honestly. I'm trying to figure out who it is, and I can't see it.
I can hear somebody. It's like they're moving something in the background. So that ORP is going to keep you at a constant disinfection level versus the dips and valleys. It's like a video versus taking a picture is how I try to explain it to people. So having that's going to help. Effects on of ORP with increased cyanuric acid. Yes, it does affect it. High cyanuric acid levels will reduce your chlorine activity, which then you'll see a lower millivolt reading. So best practices when it comes to education. Signage is, you have to do something where if there's not somebody there, you're still educating the patron. So signage is the way to do it. So have a signage for do not drink the fountain water is recirculated. Signage to show where diaper changing areas are located so that they're not changed right next to the splash pad. Signage about do not swim while ill with diarrhea. Control the bathing load, post signage, but that still gets really difficult. Have signage about shower before entering. I know this is all on our required rules, but if there's anybody outside of Florida that doesn't, they don't have that, that's listening, then that might be something beneficial. You want to get all those body oils and everything off your skin before you're going to add it to that splash pad water, that then your disinfectant's going to be binding to that, and then it's not free to be able to disinfect and oxidize anymore. You want to advocate use of swim diapers for diaper-aged children, and signage in the splash pad bathrooms on washing of hands prior to returning to the splash pad, and signage on taking children on bathroom breaks so that they don't have accidents in the splash pad. So this is a typical bathroom at a splash pad. They have their diaper changing, their hand washing. This is a hand dryer. They had soap on the wall over here. So check all that. You want to check your splash pad sign. Make sure that it's easy to read and it's visible to people to be able to read it. It's really going to help tell people. So this is a splash pad down in the county I worked at, and this was their splash pad sign. There's their shower. This was their little splash pad here that they had. And I believe I have some embedded videos here, just so that we can, if anybody's new, this is a very tiny
with the health
pad.
department.
Very tiny splash pad.
I've been coming
Okay.
in for a while. I was waiting for this to open.
We have bigger ones in the
No,
States.
you're
This
good.
is a little
I'm trying to
tiny
make sure I don't get the kids in.
So this is checking their
No
signage.
food or beverages in the fountain or on the fountain wet deck. Fountain wet deck's 4 feet out from the water edge.
Okay.
No glass or animals in the fountain area. Bathing loads 20. Fountain hours dawn to dusk. Shower before entering. Do not, these are both required on splash pads in Florida. Do not swallow the fountain water, is recirculated.
Okay.
And do not use the fountain while you're ill with diarrhea.
Cool.
And then they added no climbing, but that's not required. That was their own rule that they wanted to add on. They don't have to have the no diving because obviously you can't dive here. So the no diving and 4-inch lettering is not required.
Cool.
The no.
And then we get into, I think this leads into bathrooms
shower?
after.
Turn it on, make sure it works.
Shower.
Does it work?
Yep.
Yeah. All right, that's good. Now we go to the bathrooms.
Hot water, no.
Nope, not on the shower, nope. So now you're gonna check your bathrooms, even though there's.
And when I was there, this bathroom, they actually had these bathrooms closed with signs, and they should have been open because the splash pad was open, and they were trying to close them because they didn't want to have to clean them during COVID. And it was like, nope, because they're required to have bathrooms within a certain radius of the splash pad. So then we walk inside, and you'd see the inside of the bathroom, and you're looking for, they have a floor
So you wanna
drain,
make sure
they have
that
a bathroom, they have a
everything
diaper
works,
changing area.
and
This
there's
is,
no sitting
so
sewage
it's got
or
the
anything like
urinal.
that.
This place is really clean.
I think that
You should
one
keep
was
it
on
clean.
automatic, and then this one's the.
And hand washing, hand washing, hand
They have
washing.
their hand washing, hand soap, and either a hand dryer or disposable paper towels and a bucket to put everything in.
Cool.
They've got a drain so they can clean the floors or things back up, and they are required to have the diaper changing table because they're newer. Their shower
So now we're gonna go into the equipment.
areas. So I think your
This is
holding
the
tank's over
newer
here, right?
splash pad.
Yeah.
So
So
this is their holding tank.
basically the closest you get to a swimming pool.
So
on
that's
a
their
splash
holding
pad,
tank.
Patrick.
Okay.
Is their holding tank. They have 2 holding tanks.
And they're very, very tiny.
So
There's-
this is the pool. This holds the majority of the water that's coming back through those drains, come here, and then it's going to go through the equipment over there. So the pump pulls from this tank, these tanks. Yeah. And then the pump from there pulls from the tank, and then it's going to send it through the filtration system and through your.
Skip a little bit here.
Oh, your
Let's
system
see.
better not.
Here's their equipment.
Well,
Walk them through the equipment for me, like the UV and all that.
all right. The UVs are controlled here, and these control the pump. This is the UV ultraviolet. There's one for each, one there. Filters are cartridge filters.
So they're using a cartridge filter right here. And then they have Cal Hypo feeder as their primary feeder.
Kind of cross, but they are separate. And then we have the waterfall over here that's separate, it's just a
Yep.
pump and a filter.
And we don't regulate the waterfall because it's.
And then you'll see eventually they do have an acid tank as well.
Flows here
With a
will kind of be
pH adjustment
confusing.
meter to
This
feed
flow is
acid.
the general flow through the system.
Because of the
We're
Cal
looking
Hypo.
at 70 gallons a minute, but when
There's their
the
flow
pumps
meter
are working,
on
it takes
return line.
90%.
You're allowed 20% off anyway, so.
So
Yep.
it's probably in that range.
Yep.
These are the flow meters for the chlorinators. When they come on, it's an adjustment of how much chlorine I can draw into it, so I don't overshoot or it doesn't, not get enough, and then it'll pile it up too. Simple things affect the chemistry, the alkalinity. The alkalinity between 60 and 80 parts, everything's beautiful. When the alkaline gets low, it cools the probe. These are digital probes, so they're monitoring the
They're on
temperature.
ORP. Is that the ORP for the
ORP.
splash pad?
So there's their ORP back here. They have a cat
So that's the
2000.
splash pad over here.
There's their
So then
pH
you're at
adjustment
cat
meter
2000.
right there.
Got it. And then you're on acid feed.
That's the center
The center
feeding
effect.
acid. And then
Nice.
the tank is over.
And this is that same type of ORP that you saw, just a different company from when we were at Gloria Esteban's hotel. It works on the same principle. They can
So
put
that's
set points in, and
that's-
areas.
So that's the equipment. So this is just pictures I combined together of that tour so that you could see here if you couldn't really see in the video. So they use Pulsar to their primary disinfectant for chlorine. They feed that. It's briquettes and a spray erosion feeder. They have a Stenner pump pulling from a acid tank that's properly labeled. And both of these are connected to our ORP controller that's monitoring their pH and ORP levels. And then they put their set points in here to turn the feeders on and off as needed. This is their cartridge filter here. This is their pump here. So this is the feed system here that goes with the cow hypo feeder. It has its own little flow meter for that erosion feeder. And back here, that again, that big black tube is their ultraviolet light, and that's the control bots for the UV intensity, which that's not connected to ORP. Okay.
Yep.
And then this
Green
is just showing
good,
the
red is
UV.
bad.
That's good.
Anything over 75 in the UV we're looking for, that always runs between 80 and 90. Sometimes
Okay.
it'll bounce up to 100, and the same over there.
I didn't know that part. I don't know a whole lot about the UV side of it.
This is always giving me a water temperature there, so we know.
So he said 75% on that UV intensity is good. And he usually ran around 85 to 90, which is much higher than the 75%. So that's a newer splash pad. This is an older splash pad that was approved prior to requiring secondary disinfection, just to give you an example. So this is their equipment area. It's in a open up the fiberglass, huge cover that sometimes doesn't stay and falls on your head. I know some of you are probably like laughing right now because that's happened to you. Or you open it up and there's a pipe and then you put it up and then it slides and then it falls on your head. They don't always stay up. But they're using Cal Hypo in here as well. But there's no secondary disinfection.
So what we're looking at is similar to what we had at the.
So here's that that flow meter for the Cal Hypo feeder.
Solenoid valve right there for the pulsar system.
We'll show you the pulsar system. They have it mounted outside of the equipment area.
They put a garbage.
It's over here, and they covered it so that the rain doesn't
So if we lift
affect
that
it.
off,
So if
so
we
you
take
see the
that
tubes going
off,
from the
you'll
feeder,
see
one
their
going
pulsar
in,
feeder.
where the flow meter is going in, and then one going into the return line. Okay? So if we took this off, there's your pulsar system. Okay?
Cal
Not
Hypo.
all. I mean, yep. So no liquid chlorine. They're using Cal Hypo. There's the calcium hypochlorite briquettes that come in that bucket. So they store, as long as it's closed and sealed, it's fine to keep it there. If it was open, it wouldn't be good to keep it in here because it would destroy everything. Okay? So it's pretty much everything on this side to look at. We can close this because I believe the Stenner pump's on the other side. What do we have over here, Patrick?
The 1 gallon acid and 10 gallon water.
That's how they mix it. But that's their acid and water mixture tank for what? What are they using that for?
Reduce the pH.
Yes. Good job. pH adjustment. Good job, Patrick.
But that doesn't run.
And why are they using acid?
Because
Cal Hypo has a high pH. So they counteract that high pH by bringing it down with an acid solution. And yes, you are correct. There will be an ORP controller on the other side over here. Let's go look. Look, you're even going to have the kudos from me on the video when I send it to you. You're going to hear how awesome you got it. Okay, you got to lift it up. Sometimes they get stuck. So there's their ORP controller.
So that's the ORP controller. And they're at a 7.7, and if you look at the 785 ORP, they can set their set points here. They have their alarms that if they're going off, it'll flash.
That's your multi-port valve?
That's the multi-port valve. They have a stand filter here.
got it.
So there's no UV system in here. So they have that sand filter. There's their water quality log.
So we can look at that.
Is this their flow meter?
No. The flow meter.
Their flow meter was always so hard to look at. That's
Way over
it.
there. So let's finish up here.
So that's basically an old splash pad compared to a newer splash pad. Difference, secondary disinfection. They had a slightly, they're using cartridge filtration on the newer one, gets to a smaller micron size versus the old one that had a sand filter on it. So that's the end of my presentation today, and I thank you guys for being on with me about splash pads and public health risks. I guess we'll open it up to questions, and if you need to contact me, there's my contact info if you have any questions. After we field questions now, how do you want to do that, Michael?
All right, so thank you very much. I do have some questions that were sent. The first one is, should you close a pool if you see a small amount of animal poop in a pool or splash pad?
You should close the pool, yes, no matter what. If it's diarrhea or solid, if it's animal or human, doesn't matter. Close the pool immediately and follow CDC guidelines.
Our next question is, biofilm cannot accumulate in the holding tank, ?
I think it can. Biofilm can build up in there. It's possible. But again, good chlorine disinfection, because remember, your chlorine disinfection is going through that tank as well.
All right, does anybody have any other questions? We'll give them a second here to populate in the chat if you do.
And you're welcome to email me or call me or text me if you ever have any questions, guys. And I'll be around. I'm still a member of FEHA, so you can always contact Michael too, and he knows how to contact me.
We got one more question. What is the best place to sample for testing for our inspections?
I used to test in 2 different places because a lot of the splash pads are on ORP. I would test at the splash pad because that's where the people are coming into contact with the water. So you want to know what the level is there. And I would also compare it at the ORP controller where the port is, that you can, they can test right there. They can turn the little valve and get some water in their comparator there. I always like to compare the 2 to see where the difference is, because you're getting a water level in 2 different, chlorine residual in 2 different places.
Next question, if ducks or other animals are in the pool when you arrive for the inspection, should the pool be closed?
I don't think the department has anything in rule about that. So that would be kind of that gray area that you'd probably want to just make a call to your pool operator or the property manager, whoever's in charge of that pool, and advise them of what you found while you were there, and that they, you can always go above and beyond and make that advice, because even if it's not in rule, but you have that, you're a public health official and you know what needs to be done. So even if it's not in a rule that you can enforce, you still want to try to go above and beyond as a public health official and try to make it safe. So if it was me, I wouldn't be able to close it, I don't think, but you'd be able, it may fall under the catch-all category. If it's really bad, you might be able to close it due to the catch-all category, which is anything that the health inspector deems as a public health risk. So if you feel that it's really bad, I mean, if there's one bird dropping or there's only a couple birds, you kind of have to, this is where you kind of have to make the decision as a health inspector based on how bad it is. If it's really minor, then I would just call the pool operator and advise them what they need to do. But if it's really bad, I walked into one once, there was bird poop all over the pool deck and there was a flock of ducks in the pool, I would close that. That's going to be a lot different than just one. I mean, they're outdoor pools. You can't control every outdoor pool, with a bird landing somewhere. So you got to kind of use that sense of what you're going to do.
So how much bird poop or animal poop in a pool would it take for you to close it? So if you do have a couple of geese in the pool, would that be worse off than having a couple of pigeons in the pool because of the size of the
Well,
poop that would go in there or the mass?
I don't think so. And remember, there's less things spread from animals to humans than it is human to human. So the biggie here that we're talking about is human poop. You know, the human poop is you spread human to human very easily, these organisms that we talked about. So you want to make sure, yeah, if it's bad enough, close it and write it up under your other category. And then specify in detail in the inspection section what you saw, and that should cover you. And then always make a call, communication with the property manager, property management company, pool operator. They can get out there a lot quicker and try to get it rectified and get it reopened as soon as possible. But remember, most of the animals you treat as a solid stool incident, except for raccoons. Raccoons, it's a little bit different process. It's about filtration and that kind of thing. 24-hour continuous filtration to be able to get the roundworm out. So you can read those on the CDC website, but birds, you treat it as a solid stool incident from a human. So 2 ppm for 30 minutes. So if you had a 5 ppm in the pool that you tested, even if there was a bird in it, there's enough chlorine to kill what they're going to spread per CDC guidelines.
Somebody's asking if, can you recommend foul deterrents like wires and reflectors that scare them off?
For private pools, yeah, there's all kinds of critter things, but for public pools, you can't, because they'd be obstructions on the pool deck. So for private pools, sure, you can do whatever you want. They make those little mat things that are spiky that won't hurt them, but it deters them. People put owls out there, the plastic owls like you use for your gardens. There's lots of it's called Critter Clear or something like that. And I think they made it to keep raccoons out of the pool mainly. So raccoons are the ones that spread specifically that roundworm. Everything else is treated like a solid stool incident. So you really wouldn't close the pool unless if it's that bad, if the whole deck got bird poop. But that's that gray area. You have to make that decision.
So perhaps I missed this. Is the splash pad and a swimming pool, is that generally on the same filtration system, or do they generally have 2 separate ones for that?
They're separate.
They're separate. So if you close the pool, you don't generally have to close the splash pad at all times.
Correct. So some big more populated areas in Florida might have an HOA that has a pool and has their own splash pad within the same fenced-in area. You can close one venue without having to close the other venue. They just have to make sure that they're putting signs at all points of access. And a swimming pool gets really hard when you have something else on the same deck. A lot of pool inspectors will shake their head. It's hard to keep them out from using one if you're just posting signs around the pool. Spas are easier to close because they're small. So you can put tape around it. They can put yellow tape around it and put signs that are easily seen. The larger the pool is, the harder it is to close and keep something else open in the same fenced-in area.
Do you know how often it is that these larger splash pads will get closed down, say at like Busch Gardens or Legoland? Do they utilize a different filtration process than, let's say, a smaller pool would? Or a county?
Probably not. They're probably just, their equipment's much larger than what we saw. What we saw in my presentation were, smaller splash pads. They're going to have the same equipment, just bigger, to be able to treat more water. But they're most likely using UV. I got to inspect one of the Disney resorts in our county. It was a beach resort, and they have it's an activity pool, but it also sprays water as a spray feature / I call it aquatic playground. And they added UV on. They weren't required to. They decided to add UV on as secondary disinfection to that particular facility, along with their main chlorine disinfection, which they use Cal Hypo.
So in the event that you do close a pool and then come to find out as soon as you left, they reopened it again without following the proper procedures, what is the protocol for that?
Protocol, it depends on the county. Like our county, we had a local environmental control hearing board. So if we close something and they reopened it without the department approval, we could take them to our local county hearing board, and the hearing board can decide to impose fines if they chose to. Other counties do not have that avenue and have to go through their regional attorney. And sometimes, you know, it depends on the offense and how bad it is, because they get so many of them from so many counties, they can't do them all. So I was very fortunate that we were in a county that we did it locally. So we were able to take everything that was repeat or gross negligence to our hearing board.
All right, well, thank you. If we don't have any other questions, I want to thank everybody for coming to our webinar today. This slideshow will be available on the FEHA website under the Distance Learning tab. This recording will be available under the Distance Learning tab as well. But please note it's only available to active FEHA members. So if you are not an active member, please renew your membership. We will have other webinars coming up, so check your email for that. And also check your emails the next couple days for their certificate for your attendance in today's webinar. With that, thank you very much, Lauren, for putting this all together. It was definitely very interesting, and I'm sure everybody else enjoyed that as well.
Thank you, guys. It's nice seeing some old names up on here. And yes, Dwayne, you need to contact me. You got my phone number there. Dewan, I think it's Dewan. Contact me. I'd love to work with you as well. You got my phone number. You can call me or text me anytime or email me. It was nice to meet everybody on here. Hopefully I get to see you at a FEHA function very soon in person.
All right, well, thanks a lot, guys, and enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you, guys. Have a good day.